There's a simple question that could determine who wins the global economy over the next decade. What if the country that dominates an industry isn't the one with the best technology, but the one that can afford to lose money longer than everyone else? 10 years ago, almost no one believed Germany could lose its leadership in the solar panel industry. Just as few imagined that Europe's electric vehicle market would be overtaken by Chinese brands in only a few years. Yet that is exactly what happened. And if you look at the document Beijing has just released, many analysts believe that was only the beginning. Because the next targets are no longer solar panels or electric vehicles. They are artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology, aerospace, advanced materials, and semiconductors. The real question is no longer whether China will succeed. It is why so many countries continue to be surprised by a strategy that has been publicly announced years in advance. In March 2026, China unveiled its 15th five-year plan, a document spanning more than 140 pages that outlines the country's industrial strategy through 2030. Within it, Beijing once again identifies the industries it intends to lead, from AI and robotics to biotechnology, aerospace, and quantum computing. At first glance, it looks like just another government planning document, similar to thousands of national development strategies published around the world every year. But looking back over the past 2 decades, it becomes clear that China's 5-year plans are much more than political promises. They have repeatedly served as the starting signal for massive shifts in capital, technology, and manufacturing capacity. And that is precisely why this latest plan has attracted so much attention. But that's only part of the story. To understand why what appears to be a dry government document is being closely watched by businesses from Berlin to Tokyo to Detroit, we need to go back to an industry that was once considered one of Europe's greatest industrial success stories. A little more than a decade ago, Germany was the global symbol of the solar industry. German companies produced some of the world's highest quality solar panels. Tens of thousands of people worked in factories, research centers, and export businesses. At the time, almost nobody imagined that the industry could disappear so quickly. Then solar panel prices began to fall. At first, prices declined by only a few percent each year, but the pace accelerated. Within roughly a decade, the price of a solar panel had fallen by nearly 90%. For consumers, this was fantastic news. Renewable energy became more affordable than ever before. For European manufacturers, however, it was a disaster. Profit margins evaporated. Factory after factory shut down. Companies that had once dominated the market filed for bankruptcy. Today, more than 80% of the world's solar panels are manufactured in China. The same story unfolded with EV batteries, then with electric vehicles themselves. Many people describe this as China's manufacturing miracle. But was it really a miracle? Or had everything been planned long before it happened? The surprising answer is that the strategy had been publicly available for years. Every 5 years, Beijing publishes a list of industries it intends to prioritize. The important part isn't the list itself. It's what happens after that list is released. In many Western economies, an industrial strategy serves mainly as a guideline. Businesses may choose to follow it or ignore it. Banks continue evaluating loans based on commercial risk. Local governments pursue their own priorities. China works very differently. The moment an industry appears in the national plan, the entire system begins moving in the same direction. State-owned banks dramatically expand lending to companies operating in that sector. Local governments compete fiercely to attract factories by offering free land, tax exemptions, and a wide range of incentives. The result is a chain reaction in which investment, production capacity, and supply chains all flow toward the same industry simultaneously. That is the first major difference. But there is another factor that most people overlook. In China, many local officials are evaluated based on their ability to meet economic development targets. That means when Beijing declares an industry to be a national priority, local governments suddenly have a powerful incentive to attract projects, build factories, and support companies within that sector. In other words, the 5-year plan doesn't simply remain a document on paper. it becomes the personal incentive structure for thousands of local officials across the country. One of the clearest examples is the electric vehicle industry. In 2020, the city of Hefei invested roughly 5 billion yuan to acquire a stake in NIO, an EV manufacturer that was struggling financially at the time. Just a few years later, after the company recovered, the investment became one of China's most celebrated industrial success stories. Soon afterward, many other cities began trying to replicate the same model. Alongside that came hundreds of billions of dollars in government support for the EV industry over multiple years. Individually, none of these policies may seem particularly extraordinary. Many governments around the world subsidize strategic industries. The difference is what happens when every major policy begins pulling in exactly the same direction and continues doing so year after year. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part is not that China supports its industries. It's that it usually tells everyone exactly what it's about to do. As early as 2015, China's national plan had already identified electric vehicles as a strategic industry. Germany's major automakers knew this. They translated the documents. They discussed them in board meetings. But most still believed that decades of engineering expertise and strong global brands would be enough to protect their market position. Meanwhile, China continued investing, expanding its supply chains, lowering production costs, and gradually capturing global market share. And the story didn't stop with automobiles. Shipbuilding was once dominated by South Korea. High-speed rail technology once depended heavily on Japan, France, and Germany. Drones, batteries, solar power, and several other industries followed remarkably similar paths. China first learned from foreign technology. Then it dramatically expanded production. Eventually, it became the world's manufacturing center for those industries. And that history explains why the 2026 plan is attracting so much attention. Because this time, Beijing is no longer focusing primarily on industries where manufacturing scale alone can create an advantage. Instead, it is targeting sectors widely regarded as the West's final technological strongholds: artificial intelligence, next-generation robotics, biotechnology, advanced materials, quantum computing, hydrogen technologies, aerospace, and semiconductors. If the story of solar panels and electric vehicles was only the first chapter, then China's newest 5-year plan may be opening the next one. The bigger question is no longer whether history can repeat itself. It's whether the rest of the world is finally prepared, or whether it will once again realize what happened only after the factories have closed, the prices have collapsed, and the market has already changed. But if this story were simply about China expanding its manufacturing capacity, the rest of the world probably wouldn't be nearly as concerned. What has caught the attention of so many analysts is that this new list of priorities moves into some of the highest value sectors of the global economy. This is no longer about producing cheaper products. It is about competing for control of the technologies that will shape the global economy over the next 10 or even 20 years. One of the most striking examples is biotechnology. For decades, the world's most groundbreaking medicines were almost always invented in the United States or Europe. Western pharmaceutical companies invested tens of billions of dollars into research, confident that they would remain at the forefront of innovation. But China's latest plan suggests Beijing is no longer satisfied with being the world's low-cost pharmaceutical manufacturer. Its goal is now to become the place where the next generation of breakthrough drugs is created. That is one reason why the story of Ozempic has become such an important symbol of this shift. For years, Ozempic has been one of the world's most successful medicines. Yet the most interesting development isn't that its Chinese patent expires years before it does in many Western markets. It's that an increasing number of global pharmaceutical companies are now looking to China for the next breakthrough molecule. According to the document, a growing share of major pharmaceutical licensing deals now involve compounds developed by Chinese biotech firms, suggesting that the center of innovation itself may be starting to shift. This could be another sign that a familiar pattern is repeating itself. First comes learning, then comes manufacturing at scale, and finally comes competing in innovation itself. But that's only part of the story. There is still one industry where the West maintains an overwhelming advantage: commercial aviation. For decades, Boeing and Airbus have dominated the global market for large passenger aircraft. This industry has some of the highest technological barriers in the world, requiring decades of engineering expertise, extraordinarily complex supply chains, and some of the strictest safety certification standards ever created. That is why many people believe aviation represents the West's final industrial fortress. Yet Beijing has placed aerospace firmly on its list of strategic priorities. China's C919 still depends heavily on foreign engines and imported systems, and today it cannot truly compete with Boeing's or Airbus's best-selling aircraft. But history offers an important reminder. China's electric vehicles looked uncompetitive in 2015. Its solar panels were dismissed years earlier. Both industries eventually transformed global markets. No one knows whether the C919 will follow the same path. But history suggests that underestimating China's persistence has been an expensive mistake before. However, if we take a closer look, this story isn't simply divided into winners and losers. One of the document's most interesting arguments is that the companies benefiting the most are often not those competing directly against China. Let's go back to solar energy. European solar panel manufacturers suffered enormous losses as prices collapsed year after year. Factories closed. Companies disappeared. Yet at the very same time, an entirely new ecosystem emerged. Businesses specializing in installation, financing, energy management software, inverters, and power electronics flourished precisely because solar hardware had become dramatically cheaper. In other words, falling prices didn't just destroy one industry. They created entirely new ones. Companies such as Enphase and SolarEdge didn't succeed by manufacturing solar panels themselves. Instead, they focused on the electronics and intelligent systems that transformed inexpensive Chinese panels into complete residential energy solutions. The greatest opportunities were no longer inside the factory. They were created further down the value chain. That represents a very different way of thinking about global competition. Instead of asking, "How do we beat China?" many businesses may eventually begin asking a different question. How do we profit from the wave that China is creating? Interestingly, the document itself points in exactly that direction. If companies know years in advance which industries China intends to expand aggressively, they can prepare complementary products and services rather than entering a direct manufacturing battle. As production capacity grows, hardware prices tend to fall. But demand often rises for logistics, software, systems integration, financing, maintenance, consulting, and countless supporting services. That leads to an even bigger question. If the roadmap has been publicly available all along, why has the West repeatedly reacted so slowly? According to the document, the answer isn't necessarily a lack of money or technological capability. The real difference lies in the structure of the system itself. China can pursue the same industrial objectives consistently for many years, without being interrupted by election cycles. In contrast, government priorities in many Western democracies can shift significantly after each election. As a result, businesses often hesitate to make investments that require 10 or 15 years to pay off because they simply don't know whether today's policies will still exist a few years from now. Of course, that doesn't mean China's model is perfect. Far from it. The document itself acknowledges that concentrating enormous amounts of capital into a single industry often creates massive overcapacity, fierce domestic competition, and extraordinary financial losses. The solar industry illustrates this perfectly. China built manufacturing capacity far beyond global demand, driving prices to historic lows and causing heavy losses even for many Chinese manufacturers themselves. That is the price of an industrial strategy built on scale. It can produce global champions. But it can also wipe out hundreds of domestic companies before only a handful remain strong enough to dominate the market. Perhaps that is the biggest lesson of this entire story. It is not that China is guaranteed to win every industry, nor is it that the West is destined to lose. The more important question is how governments, investors, and businesses interpret the signals that are already in front of them. If they dismiss China's 5-year plan as just another government document, they may repeat the same mistakes made in solar panels and electric vehicles. But if they view it as a roadmap showing where capital, manufacturing capacity, and political attention will be concentrated over the coming years, it could become one of the most valuable strategic documents available to anyone trying to understand the future of the global economy. And perhaps the most important question isn't how many more industries China can dominate. The real question is whether the rest of the world will once again wait until factories have closed, prices have collapsed, and market share has already shifted before responding. Or whether, this time, they will read the map before the race truly begins.
Thank you for following this story. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it. For now, this is goodbye. Thank you for staying with Societale Stories.